Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. In the fast paced world of tech and products, finding joy and building meaningful connections can be as crucial as coding your next best feature. Whether you're the first time founder or an avid creator or even a indie hacker, knowing what excites you about building products, learning from doing, and discovering how to navigate the right networks are key. Here's Nguyen, product lead, venture capitalist, one of the co-founders of Women in Product community, who also embraces fractional work and growing possibilities for the last 2 decades with us on the Founders Foyer. She's currently the founder and managing partner of NextStep, supporting early stage founders on their journey to become master operators, company builders, and people leaders. She's a tournament poker player who made the final table of a World Poker Tour tournament. And she's one of the best folks that I've seen in the product space, in the community space so far. Thank you, Ha, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Australia. Oh my gosh, what a introduction. Thank you so much. You're too kind.
There's a lot more to explore about you, Ha, and like I can't wait to get started.
Well, it's
Cool.
great to be here. And happy birthday, everyone. We're here from sunny California, and excited to be chatting with you this morning.
Yeah, sunny California and a very sunny Chennai too. So, yes. And the best way to start this conversation is what intrigued me from your profile, because I've seen you chatting about embracing joy, connections, and discovery to its fullest. I love this intersection. How's this helped shape the personality that you have in tech today?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, those themes were part of my more recent sabbatical that I had taken about 2 years ago. After 23 years in tech, I decided that I needed the mental health break. I took 6 months off before sort of starting my current venture. And I was sort of thinking about like, how did I want to spend the time? And it really came to me that it was going to be about, first and foremost, connection. So reconnecting with people that I've been working with in the past, but hadn't seen in years, or maybe making new connections. And so that was really important for me to build my professional network and reconnect with friends and colleagues. When we're working full time, it's very hard for us to take the time and the space, to connect with others outside of the colleagues that we're working with day in and day out. And so I really wanted to make a point of that. The other thing that I wanted to do was to like try new things. And so that's the discovery part, like travel to new places that I hadn't been before, do some fun things that I would never have done, like Reiki and meditation, but just sort of embrace and seize the moment. And then finally, the joy part was that every day I would do something that brought me joy. And sometimes it was in discovering new things or making new connections. And sometimes it was just things that I enjoyed myself, whether that was having a dinner party and cooking, or going to a live sporting event. And so I tried to incorporate joy in every part of my day. And I think that those are, themes that I have embraced, throughout my almost 25 years in tech. I just sort of didn't articulate it quite as crisply. But if you sort of think about it, right, it's like work is work, but like why do we exist? What is life all about? And it is about human connection. It is about discovering like what you love and what you're passionate about, and then finding the joy in everyday moments.
Yeah. Wow. This is so wholesome. I like how this episode is particularly starting on a very meditative tone. And I totally agree with you, Ha, because like I said, some of these are what we naturally embrace in our day-to-day lives, and especially with work in the product and the tech circles as well. But sometimes it takes us that step back to kind of recenter and understand that, oh, like it's very important to stay connected with people that matter to us. be there for each other's ideas, listen to each other's work, and sort of like help champion each other. And this gets very hard because we always treated connections as a chore. Like we always thought that this was more like oh, like I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to build my network. But from what you said and shared, it seems like, it's a very natural thing that we have to include as a part of how we embrace work. And knowing that and learning to do that is going to help us, I think, go forward in a much better way than treat it more as an action item.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a lunch that I had a few months ago with 20-some-year-old friend who had shared like this inspiring story with me of how he had gotten laid off from a job, in the toughest sort of job market in tech that we've seen in a while.
Mm.
And within 5 weeks, he had 3 job offers. And I know so many people who had gotten laid off who have been 6 months, a year into the role, into the search, and
Mm.
still haven't found anything. And so I asked him, how did he do it? And he said,
Mm.
well, I followed the playbook that you and Deb Liu have written about, which is, I intentionally built up my network and tried to be as helpful as possible during those times. I was a community builder. I organized local events in San Diego, and
Mm.
I was always trying to make connections and help introduce people to each other,
Mm.
recruiters with job seekers or people who were looking to start a company with possible co-founders or just people who shared similar interests. And then when it was time for me to need the
Mm.
help, I would reach out to the folks that I had formed those connections with, and they dropped everything in order to help me. And they made all these introductions and to help me with whatever I needed. And that's how I was able to land 3 job offers within 5 weeks. And so we sometimes forget that, like, you know, that it is so important for us to build our professional network, not just when we need something from somebody, but all
Yeah.
along. Because when it's time for us to be the ones who need the help, people are going to want to help because they remember like what you did for them, or how you reached out to them, and like we're genuinely interested in like
Mm.
being helpful and learning more about them and things like that. So what's the saying that I think is so true? It's like, it's not about like what you say, but it's how you make people feel at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and so yeah, I try to embrace that in life as well. So
Yeah. Lovely. And this, the point that you just said is so powerful because it breaks what people think of networks as, which is not just going to an event or like just trying to say, oh, like I'm so and so and you're so and so, but there's a sense of giving, right? There's a sense of being able to be there in the grounds, connect people, help each other. And that's how help comes back. And you do that without probably expectation, but more of because you're really invested in people, you're really invested in their stories, and you want something to happen to them. So that's actually, I would say, the most important message in what you said about your friend sharing that story. Because for anybody who's listening this, I think it's kind of easier to think and say, oh, like yeah, they just built a network, and perhaps like you just reach out to people and you have this huge network that would help. But what went behind that is the genuine curiosity and the genuine help that the person did. And it's not just with respect to, like building that network out of just sheer connections.
yeah. And then I think one more sort of idea to leave with you and for anybody who's listening there is, my friend Jesse Freezy had introduced me to sort of this book, which I highly recommend that everybody read. It's called
Hmm.
Go Giver. But the
Okay.
idea is that, the best way to build your network and your net worth in life is to give more than you receive, right? Give with no expectation of anything in return.
Yeah.
And when you can genuinely make those authentic connections, be as helpful as you can, that you reap rewards and dividends throughout
Mm.
your life. And it might not be so obvious, but it then comes around and you see the impact. And so for those who are listening, go get the book, Go Giver, and I think it'll be very inspirational.
Yeah. Yes. And that's a good call to action. Yes, for sure. We'll check out this book. And thanks for bringing in Deb Lewis. context as well, a great fan of hers. And there's something that both of you often chat about, which is this whole concept called personal board of directors. And I really want to bring that in at this moment because we're talking about being out there, building these connections, engaging with people. But as founders and builders in tech, there's this notion that, hey, like building, just focusing on stuff, building in solitude is great, and it's like giving a lot of reflections. But it's also important to go there and find one's tribe and then sort of build this personal board of directors. So how does one get started with all of this, especially if you're in the dilemma of should I do it alone? Should I build a community? Should I have a personal board? How does this happen?
Yeah, well, I definitely embrace the philosophy of like we always get farther together than
Mhm.
than going at it alone. I think throughout my career, I've always been naturally curious and wanting to be sort of the best at whatever I took on. But I always
Mm.
knew that like I didn't always have the answers. I mean, I had a lot of answers, but not always, yeah, answers. And I also wanted to surround myself with people who like genuinely knew me well, cared about my best interest, and would be brutally honest with me. And so many years ago, I think about 10 years ago now, I had heard a few people talking about this sort of concept of a personal board of directors, including
Mm.
Gib Biddle and some others.
Yeah.
And then I thought, okay, that's the way, right? Which is find folks across many different disciplines who you could always reach out to, for help, for advice, for mentorship, maybe even for sponsorship, who
Mm.
generally care about your success and want you to succeed and will always
Mm.
be truthful to you. And so intentionally or unintentionally, I sort of built that board over the last 10 years. And I wrote a blog post around this of how like my board has been so instrumental throughout my
Mm.
career. So more recently, a couple years ago, I was presented a CEO opportunity and I reached out to my board to find out, am I ready? And
Mm.
one of my personal board of directors friends who was a COO who had turned CEO had said like,
Mm.
you are absolutely ready. Like, you are deserving of this moment. You should go do
Mm.
it. Like, and so, it helped me like get over my imposter syndrome that I wasn't ready for a
Mm.
CEO role. And so I started interviewing for it. I put together a plan for the company's board of directors to 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 share with them. And then I went to my personal board of directors
Mm.
to review the plan. And interestingly, I got some feedback back that like the plan was not very good, because
Mm.
I kept talking about myself and I didn't like get into the mind of what investors are looking for, which is how are you going to deliver true enterprise value and turn this company into $1 billion company one day.
Mm.
And so I had to go and rework the plan. But that was just like an example of like how my personal board of directors has been so instrumental in my career of like both encouraging me to go for it, and helping me get
Mm.
over my imposter syndrome, but also like being brutally honest with me and telling me like, oh, this is just not so good, or this isn't quite landing the way that you thought it would land. And
Yeah.
so I always tell everybody, go out and build your personal board of directors. I've written and spoken about it over the years. And for folks who, might not have sort of built the networks that I have built over the last 25 years,
Mm.
one company that I'm working with directly is a company called Sidebar. You can check out sidebar.com, but
Yeah.
they do help leaders and founders build their personal board of directors, and always happy
Mm.
to chat if that's something that you want to explore. And I always sort of view it as a shortcut to helping you build your personal board of directors as well as your professional network.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard about Sidebar and I've seen you like do a lot of these Sidebar sessions with folks. So definitely a great way for folks who are looking for that variety in being able to connect with people. Because if you're somebody from the product background and you'd like to like connect with folks from similar backgrounds or like very parallel ones, I think it's definitely a very smoother way to meet people across from the different parts of the globe. But yeah, like I'll also make sure to link that in the show notes for sure. But coming back to what you said, I completely agree with you, because the same group that you said in terms of being able to push you further and give you that confidence is also like trying to help you find your blind spots. And it's much necessary because sometimes we are just too much within our minds, and like we're just like constantly thinking about stuff that matter a lot to us, and we can also like go on our own confirmation bias of a lot of things. So it's definitely like good to have that check. And I've personally benefited from having a small personal board of directors for myself. And it's definitely like great, always like going back to them, like really putting that question out from your mind, and sort of like, using those as signals to understand where you stand, and how to like further things up, and always use that thing as a rational. So it also like reinforced this concept of connections, as you said. Like it's always like it doesn't happen overnight, but at the same time it's a lot of nurturing, it's a lot of the time and effort that you put in. But definitely what you reap out of it is great. So on that context, like I wanted to understand, you've also written a blog about the networking flywheel and how it's important to communicate one's ideas and take steps to find the directions that could help leverage opportunities, right? And since we're talking about finding the people, building the network, and the personal board of directors, this is what I see as perhaps as a habit, or as a way that one can build from being in that introverted circles, or being in the space where they say, oh, like I really don't know how do I go out and build that network, to actually doing it. So could you share your journey through it of your 2 decades in tech? What did your flywheel look like, and how do you start about creating one?
Yeah. Thank you for asking the question. So I wrote a recent blog post on how to build a networking flywheel, and we can
Mhm.
post it on the show notes.
Yes.
But I actually share the story of like how I'm actually an introvert. People laugh when I say that, but it's true. I love to do nothing more on a Friday night than to turn on the TV and fold my laundry. Like the idea of going out at all, like just horrifies me. And then, I share that oftentimes, like, especially in my early years when I would go to tech conferences or different events, like I'd hide out in the corner or I'd hide out in the bar because I just didn't know how to, break into a conversation to chat with anybody. And I always felt like people would just pass judgment on me of like, oh, who's
Mm.
this person? She's not anybody worth knowing. So my perspective changed about 10 years ago when I moved into the world of venture capital, after 16 years of being a product leader and a product exec.
Mm.
And I kind of realized that part of the job is founders, coming to you to pitch you on their idea so that you can write them a check. But if you don't have a network or a brand, like how will people find out about you? And so I set out then to intentionally build my both network as well as brand. So
Mm.
it started in a few different ways. So the first was just starting to write down my thoughts and my ideas, right? So like
Mm.
all the things that I learned in my 16 years of product leadership roles and how founders should apply some of those principles in order to build amazing companies. So I would write about that. I would also share just some of my stories of being a refugee immigrant and like living the American
Mm.
dream and moving over to Silicon Valley. I would, share some of the things that I was passionate about, like building community and and working with mission-driven companies. And I found that the more that I wrote, the more that people who shared, those same values and principles and ideas like would reach out to me, including founders, so that was one
Right.
thing I did. Second, I started getting asked to speak a lot at different tech events and conferences. And so that allowed me to not just build a brand and get my ideas out there, but
Mm.
then people would start coming up to me at
Mm.
conferences, chatting with me. And I'm like, oh, now instead of me having to break into a conversation, people are like approaching me, and
Mm.
and that felt nice. And then another thing that I did was I started intentionally building communities. And so I helped to build the Women in Product community. So now a community of 30,000 female PMs. around the
Yeah.
globe with 30 doctors. I've been on the board for the last 8 years or so, and it's
I'm a
such an
member
amazing
from the India
organization.
chapter. So happy
Yeah,
on the India chapter. Yes.
thank you for all you do to build the India chapter, Ashaya. I also formed the Product Leaders Summit with my friends Gib Biddle and Dan Olson, and it's a VP product community where we gather VPs of product annually for a day and a half of
Mm.
networking and learning. I also started my VC firms like annual founder summits where we would bring portfolio founders and then founders even outside of
Mm.
our portfolio together for a day and a half of networking and learning. And so I became a community builder. And I think that like when you're a community builder, it helps, it helps connect you with people who are like-minded, who share, some of the same things that you're passionate about. And you end up becoming like sort of part of the center where people start
Yeah.
reaching out to you. So, so hopefully some of those ideas inspire folks, to build their network
Mm.
and 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 even if you don't do what I do, like, I think that you can always join communities
Mm.
where you're interested in, the things that that the community is all about, like, their
Mm.
mission, values, the things that align with your interests. And so I always just encourage folks to like, find their people, find their tribe, find their community. Or go out and build one if you have the desire and the motivation.
Yeah, totally. And it's sounding more like, being that enabler out there. And even if it doesn't mean that your intent is to eventually build a community, it's just being right there, being able to share one's original ideas and being as an enabler in the space is going to help a lot in attracting. Because when I heard your story, a lot of what resonates to me is how there was like a constant giving out of signals in terms of saying, hey, like I'm there, I'm here to like help you out, at the same time being able to learn from each other's journey. Both of this was very reflecting in what you said, as from building out communities or like being there to write about what you've been through and then have people reciprocate with that. So I think, like, yeah, like how you said, even if you don't want to like build out communities, for people listening to this, the best way to just be there and make those connections is just being authentic, right? Like being who you are and being able to share what you learn. And that reminds me of how, like, a couple of years ago there was this constant, one of the doubts that I used to have is, hey, like I'm learning in the path, and is it okay if I'm going to be sharing these in LinkedIn or sharing some of these in writings? And then I was like, you know what? Everybody's learning like me, and let's just go ahead and probably share our learning journey. And perhaps there'll be another person who comes and shares that learning journey with us. And that is what led me into the podcast. That is what led me into my whatever kind of writings that I do. So, like, every time you said about it, and even the women in product chapter that I co-ran with a couple of my friends, some of the best friends that I found from the circle, is because we were just out there wanting to learn and wanting to like meet people who are also in a very similar space. So a lot of that just resonated, and I hope for the listeners too, it's more of an inspiration to pick from what you've been through.
Yeah. And first of all, I love that you shared some of your stories around building authentic connections with folks. I would say that the one objection I constantly hear from people, especially who are hesitant to get their ideas out there in the world,
Mm.
is that they don't have an original idea. What can they share that hasn't already been said? And
Mm.
what I always say is that, like, uh, you know, even if there's no original idea out there, like, your ideas are your ideas, your experiences are your experiences. They're going to be
Yes.
authentic and unique to you. And if you
Yes.
sort of just share a little bit about the idea, but
Mm.
your authentic journey or experience around that idea, it's going to be new and fresh, and it's going to resonate with somebody, maybe in the beginning, like a small number of people, and over time, it sprouts into
Yeah.
more and more people. And so, like, yeah, get over the fear, just go out
Yeah.
and do it, and people will go and find you.
Yeah, less excuses and I think more of being there, doing that thing, and learning from it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hi, you also mentioned about, from a community perspective, you mentioned about the mission, being able to understand the values, and then wanting to belong. I think for founders also, you say a very similar thing, right? It's important to keep the mission right, and focus on what's the sense of purpose in tech. For a lot of founders today who are perhaps first time into entrepreneurship, from your experience of working, let's say, as a VC with multiple other founders, and as a product lead, and having built a couple of these products yourself, what would you suggest to best focus on, especially from setting the vision and sticking to values? Because these are people who are doing it from ground up. So, what is something that you've observed to help?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, I would say that if you're still newer to the founder journey, or you're thinking about going and exploring the founder journey, think
Mm,
about picking a problem that you're just so passionate about, where you can't envision doing anything else but like working on this singular problem for the next 5, 10, 20 years.
mm,
So it has to sort of deeply resonate with you, right? I would say that, and you alluded to this, which is, you know, articulating what that mission is, so like, what are you looking to build in the world that like makes it better? It changes people's lives for the better. So we call it mission driven, but like when you articulate your mission and you share that like passion and that mission with the world,
mm,
people who are connected to that mission will find you. Like, they'll gravitate towards you. That includes potential employees, potential
mm,
investors, even customers, right?
mm,
And so you really want to be very clear on your own personal why, sort of the mission, and get people excited around the mission so that they become part of your journey as well. And, and so those are just sort of some ideas to get started. And I think like
mm.
once you're in, right, I would say, and this comes from my product background, but like just talk to customers, like do customer discovery, not just from the very beginning, but throughout your 5, 10, 15, 20-year founder journey. Like stay close to a customer, carve out the time, at least a half day, 1 day a week, to just line up your meeting schedule with like customer interviews or customer coffee chats, because you've
Yeah.
learned so much about you know about them, about the products that you should be
Mm,
building for them, about like
mm.
the bugs and the challenges that you need to fix. And sometimes you learn that like, the product that you're building isn't actually the product that's going to solve, their specific situation or problem. And it's good to validate or invalidate that, right? And so um, continue to talk to your customers, continue to do customer discovery, get the entire company, your employees to embrace that mindset as well. But it
Mm.
starts from the top. So that's piece of advice from my many years of product. Um, so yeah, so this is just some ideas, for founders who are kind of just getting started and early in the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how it's covering both the sides. As a hardcore product person, there's a lot to do with customers and being able to go sort of empathize with them and understand. And as a product person, I can agree a lot with this, because this is exactly what you do day in, day out. And at the end of the day, you're building for them. And I also like the VC angle to it, which is, to me, it sounded more like what one of our podcast guests used to call it as founder market fit. She leads the mind the product community. She was on our podcast, and she was saying something like how it's important to understand why you have to be the person to solve this problem, and why it's I think a lot of us start with product market fit and really go deep down with product, but the other angle to it, which is something similar to what you said, is being able to really see if you should be the one to solve for this, and perhaps what makes it very special for you to solve this. And I guess with that, you get a little closer to the personal vision and the personal vision that maps with the
Yeah,
product.
yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful way of saying it, founder market fit. But yeah, I mean, just when I think about it, and again, from my VC days, it's like this startup journey is so hard. It is so hard. It
Mm.
is a roller coaster. The highs will be like, the best highs, the lows will be the worst lows, the darkest days. And there has to be something that's intrinsically motivating you to just keep pushing, keep pushing that boulder up the mountain and power through. And I think it's, your connection to the mission, to your
Mm.
why, will help a lot, and will get everybody around you to also push that
Mm.
boulder up the mountain during dark days, right? And
Right.
yeah, so I would say, think about your why, think about the mission, and get people excited around that mission, and a lot of things get solved as a result.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's more like a group project in itself where you push yourself and the folks around you along. Right. So on this context, there's one more thing I would love to pick your brain on. We're talking a lot about being able to empathize with people, being able to really connect with vision. But all over this, there's this concept of influencing people, right? Because ultimately, you're influencing your customers, you're influencing yourself, you're also like influencing your teammates, your potential employees, and investors who would personally believe in you and want to bet with you. So you've done this in different capacities as a founder, as people who help the founders, and also as a product person. So how do you understand the right context shift that's needed each time, and how do you understand the outcomes that you're supposed to align with every time you think about influencing someone?
Mm. Well, that is such a good question. So, a few things. Number one is, I think you have to be very good at like storytelling,
Mm.
throughout your life, right? And so people want to come on your journey when you explain to them sort of, the why, and share stories around that why, right? And so, maybe like, and I was early eBay, right? I was one of the first 200 employees at eBay. Every day was about sharing a story and
Mm.
connecting us to sort of the why we existed, which was that we were there to, help sellers on eBay with economic empowerment,
Mm.
democratizing entrepreneurship, but then also
Mm.
connecting people around shared values and community and shared interests. And so that was sort of the why, and we talked about it every day. But then we would share like
Mm.
customer stories. You know, the uh, the military vet who was disabled, who kind of lost his love for life until he discovered
Mm.
eBay and started trading on eBay military paraphernalia, and then connected with others who like had stories from
Mm.
their days at war and in the military, and all of a sudden like had a reason for being, right? Or the single mom who was raising 3 kids and had very little means until she discovered eBay and started selling things from her garage, and then was able to like pay for her kids like schools and ballet lessons and
Mm.
family vacations. And so, when we embraced these stories and shared it out, I mean, people were just so excited to bound out of bed every morning to get to work, to, on behalf of our customers and our community. And nobody was, blinked at all about like putting in 40, 50, 60, 80, 100, sometimes 100-hour weeks, in furthering the mission and the cause. And so I'd say that, like, when you're trying to connect with people, like, I would say understand their why,
Mm.
understand their motivations, and try to like share your story and their stories, make your story part of their story, or their story part of your story, right? And that's, I think, going to win you over a lot of fans. And so yeah, so I'd say just, be authentic, share your why, share like your story, what inspires you, make their story your story. And I
Mm.
think that gets you pretty far in life.
Yeah, no, that's so moving, and a lot of what you said relates to how people think that they're not usually good at stories because they always look at stories as a very markety thing. Like, they think that it's. I mean, it's definitely a skill. It's for sure a skill, but most often people don't realize that it starts with being authentic, like you said. It starts with being able to share what one feels and what one goes through, rather than like really looking at it as, oh, like I'm supposed to frame it in this way. I mean, like all the framing and those things get nuanced as you go by doing it. But I think the best way to start is being as raw and like as unpolished as possible. And it's nice. Like I've never like I always like enjoy storytelling, but with respect to, I think, influencing, really understanding the whys and being able to look at it as two stories, like your story, their story, and finding a middle ground there is very important. I think I really love this angle because I usually like enjoy storytelling, but looking at it from a very outcome angle to influencing is very nice. Yeah,
Uh,
thanks for sharing that. So there's this fun take that I would love to get from you, which is you are like a tournament poker player and you enjoy playing this. And I mean, like for folks listening, Ha's personal website is literally pokergirl.co. So she's like a huge poker nerd, I could see. Have you drawn parallels to product world, the tech world from the poker space? Like, would love to know that intersection.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one day I'm going to write a blog post about like everything I learned from business, I learned from poker.
Yes.
Yes, one thing for sure is taking risks, right? So I would say, after 5 years at eBay, I ended up taking some risks in terms of like going early stage. Like I love the early stage company building. And I felt like even though I was going to take a 50% pay cut, moving from like big tech, right, to
Mm,
the startup world, it was just something that like I could get my arms around and get passionate about. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't work out. But that's the risk that you take. I've always loved my career though. I've always felt
mm,
like, you know, that I was instrumental in helping to build, these companies from the ground up.
mm,
And, and so I think that like without taking some of those risks, I wouldn't have had, those amazing experiences, which I won't share today. I could go on, but like it was just some incredible experiences of building something that didn't exist and making, and building something special and putting it out into the world. I would say that another lesson that I've learned in poker is to get rid of your imposter syndrome and believe that you
mm,
belong, right? So there's so many times I'm the only woman, both, you know, around in an executive room, at a board meeting, and even
mm,
at the poker table, right?
mm,
And, you got to sort of play the game, like believing that you belong at this table, that you
mm,
have the confidence and sometimes the swagger, but but certainly the skills and the mindset to like play the game and play it well. So that's something that I've always embraced. I'm a little bit of a competitive person, but I've just never
mm,
shied away from like taking my seat at the table and playing the game well. And then finally, the another piece of advice that I have shared as it relates to poker is that sometimes if you don't like the game that you're playing in, it is
mm,
okay to walk away. And
mm,
so, sometimes like the game is too tough, and you want to like walk away from the poker table and play in a different game where you have
mm,
a competitive advantage and can win. For me, I found that, and I believe this so deeply that, in tech, we all have agency, right? And so if you're at a game or work situation that isn't helping you thrive and be the best and like work for and with like supportive managers, executive leaders, and teams that, that have the right mindset look out for you, like support you and champion you. If you're not in the right environment, then sometimes you have to like make the bold decision and take that risk of like knowing when to walk away.
Mm.
And yeah, I've shared this publicly, which is like, there were times where like if I felt like I wasn't in the right game, wasn't learning, I wasn't being supported, whatever it was, or I was working for a toxic leader, it was time to walk. And even though the future at the moment is so unknown and it's scary, I've always found that it's always been more awesome on the other side. And it hasn't taken that long for me to sort of find the next thing that like more aligned to my mission, my values,
Mm.
working with folks that had my best interest in mind, values aligned. And so I would say in some way it's those, I think, three things in terms of like some of the things I've learned in poker that applies in the business world.
Definitely. I can't wait for the blog. Just the three examples are so powerful. I can't wait for the whole blog because I'm sure that there are more intersections and more as you write about it. But this is so much empowering to listen to because a lot of times I think we look at we look at experiences as very disparate, right? We have like one which is a career, this like suddenly like the other sport, there's also like the other activity, like so many things in parallel. But I'm a huge believer of intersections. I enjoy the fact that there's one thing that feeds into the other, and sometimes very subconsciously you tend to build your own narratives with everything into the picture falling together. So I like how poker does this to you, like where there's a lot of intersections that you have with respect to like enhancing each skill, right? Like I'm pretty sure like the product would have fed a lot into the poker as well, and the poker would have fed a lot into product. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Excited. This is inspiring me. Like I gotta sit down and write that blog post pretty soon.
For sure. Yeah. I think that'll be a great read. And someone to like anybody who's also like into very similar sport, like into competitive games or into sport, I think they would also like really take that inspiration to have that intersection with what they do and what they look for. Awesome. Now I'm getting into one of the core things. I think only like a very few people would be able to answer, and I'm particularly sure that you would be like the go-to person for it, which is the concept of fractional roles. And you often talk about the fact that founders should hire more fractionally, right? And I feel like this is a concept that people are just warming up to. And I've also been reading a lot about fractional work, and for somebody like me, like how you said, like for someone who has this agency and who would really like to do like a bunch of things together, I think fractional is definitely seeming like a very good opportunity out there. And what are the questions or the reflections you think should lead founders to understanding if fractional folks would be a best fit for them? And turning the table, also asking from the angle of high agency operators, how can they position themselves to be discovered by these founders? So, from both the lenses, because you've been in the ground for both, right?
Yeah, thank you. So I, over the last year and a half, have gone and started my own consulting practice called NextStep with my business partner, Garrett Kelly. And we're fractional executives, so fractional COOs, if you will, where we can help support on everything from strategy, operations.
Hmm.
I don't really do product work anymore, but I also do a lot of support around go to market with
Hmm.
many of my founders. So in terms of the case for fractionals, so if you're a founder and you're trying to evaluate fractional, like hiring somebody fractionally versus bringing in somebody full time, think the conventional wisdom has always been, bring on somebody full time because they're dedicated to this company. They won't be like distracted. They'll know the business inside and out. I think the challenge with that mindset, though, is that especially for early stage founders, right, seed through Series B, you often can't hire or like either afford or attract folks of that caliber or that talent, right? So it's very, very hard to hire a very seasoned executive who has been through the trenches before, seen all the same challenges that you're facing, have like figured out like how to solve them, have stumbled along the way, and can take all of their learnings, and not make the same mistakes at your companies, right? I think
Right.
founders make one of two mistakes that I often see. Either they hire too junior, and so therefore they spend all of their time in the weeds, or maybe they raise their Series A and B and then they hire too senior, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it does not work out, right? Like either that seasoned VP like forgot how to get into the weeds and and get things done, or like they just weren't the right fit culture wise or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. And then, and you've spent 4 6 months, maybe a year of just wasted money, time. And so the idea behind Fractional is that you can hire seasoned, high quality executive talent for a fraction of the cost of like a full-time hire of that caliber. And there's a lot less risk behind it, right? Like you'll know within 2 weeks, like if it works out or if it doesn't. And if it doesn't work out, like no harm, no foul. You can part
Yeah.
ways. But oftentimes it will work out. And then you'll realize, wow, where has this person been all my life? How can I get more and more of their time? But oftentimes they actually can work a fraction of the time and get as much output and as much done, because they don't need to get bogged down on things like recurring meetings, or performance reviews, or just a lot of dead time. Like there's probably in any given full-time in-house role, there's probably somewhere between 20 to 40% sort of dead unproductive time.
Yeah.
And a fractional executive doesn't sort of bear that sort of overhead or that cost. I would say a fractional executive, and especially if you hire the right one, also has an extensive network, and you can leverage their network in terms of hiring in terms of introductions to investors or other advisors, or potentially even customers, especially in the SaaS world, maybe potential
Yeah.
enterprise customers too. And so I support founders in all of those ways as well. And so yeah, I could go on and on around the case for Fractional, but I'll leave it at that. I do have an upcoming blog post that I'm going to publish around the case for Fractional. So once that's out, I'll have you relink it to the show notes.
Sure.
And in terms of, I think you had a second question of like, for folks who are thinking about going fractionally, like how to think about that journey, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that like there's a number of different things. Like number one, figure out like, do you want to go at this alone, or do you want to partner up with somebody? For me, I didn't want to go at it alone. I decided that like, consulting can be lonely. And so I wanted a thought leader in this business. And I brought on Garrett Kelly, who's my business partner, who's amazing. He was 7 years at Airbnb, 2013 to 2020, all the way through IPO. So has sort of seen the journey from Wild Wild West all the way to scale. He worked with me at Swim. He and I are completely mission and values aligned. He's the best business partner that I could have brought into the business. And then we had to kind of figure out like what was our offering, and like what could we uniquely offer to founders, that would be of interest to them. And what we came up with was sort of, we would support them around strategy, operations, and go to market. I think that the biggest challenge in this business, and what scares off a lot of people, is then finding clients. And it's really akin to like if you were a tech founder, right? Like most people spend all of their time on building the product, and but they don't spend enough time thinking through the distribution and like how do you get customers to the product. Same thing with consulting, right? Which is you're probably going to have to spend at least in the first year or two, like, a good chunk of your time, somewhere between 20 to 50% on business development. And business development isn't honestly as scary as it is. It really is getting your ideas out there, telling people like what you're up to, telling the world, everybody that you meet, like what you're up to, and you just never know who ends up making those introductions to founders who could use your help. So it's also going out and meeting people, like attending events and meeting founders, and so we found clients that way. And it's also a lot of the thought leadership. So some of the writing that we've done, right, where like founders resonate with our ideas and then reach out directly to us. And so if you're really going to do this business and be successful at it, it's not just about being good at the fractional work, which I'm sure everybody, who's listening to this podcast would be excellent at the work, but it's also thinking about how do you get the work and spending equally as much time in the beginning, in the first year or two, around that. And then once you have, an established brand and book of business, if you will, et cetera, you'll be surprised. You end up like having to say no to more work than you could possibly ever imagine, which is kind of the
Right.
kind of the spot I think I'm feeling. And so and so what I've done now is like I have a small referral network of folks who I can vouch for, who when founders talk to me, I usually say I don't have capacity, but I know the best person in HR,
To
the
help
best
you.
person in product, the best person in growth and marketing to help you. And so those are just some ideas.
Very nice. And this whole concept sounds so much fun, especially for people who are like out there wanting to do something ground up. And I like how you finished off with a little bit of the whole community angle to it as well. It's like saying, yeah, like I'm going to say no, but I'm going to like put you in touch with someone who's great for this role. So it's like giving it back as always. And this is great because it to me it sounds like building your own startup, right? And in this case, the startup is what your craft is all about. I jokingly tell people that I want to do something that's like people call it as SaaS, but I want to call it as CAS, like craft as a service, and how you can actually like get more craftful people to work on different micro moments of the product, like which could be like hiring, which could be like GTM, which could be like building the product, and especially what you do. And I like how your term calls it like fractional. Like I see so much of similarity with the cast concept and the whole fractional concept here as well. So it's nice because it's opening up a lot of different opportunities for people who are listening to this as well, and who are probably thinking that, oh, like this is something that's new and I would definitely see this more aligned with my kind of work. It's nice to do that. And I like the angle that you pointed out, which is not to do it alone, but do it with someone that you would probably like have more and like wavelength with. But yeah, I do see that when you're doing it alone, it just requires like a lot of self-reflection and awareness of who you are and what drives you, I guess. Right. This is so much
I
interesting.
can't
Like,
wait until you come out with your cast offering. So I'll be the first to promote it.
thank you so much, and lots to talk about that. We'll definitely do that. And thank you so much for saying that. Cool. So how like we're so much into the discussion of building connections and the fractional angle to it, and also like understanding how should founders look into from their mindset. If there's one last thing that I would love for you to share, it's the fact that I've always seen her in like a very strong community space, right? Whether it's women in product, whether it's the sidebar coaching thing that you mentioned, whether it's hosting product leader summit and a ton of other things that you do. There's like so much that you do in terms of being as an enabler, as we spoke about. In today's world, with so many groups and communities to be a part of, how do you think product people and folks in tech who are listening to this can come to build the future? Like what more can be done and what's yet to be explored in your opinion?
Mm. Well, it's so interesting. I would say, first and foremost, never do anything that's not authentic to you. so, and then really just figure out, and that just everybody should just reflect in terms of like who are you? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? Who are the types of people that you want to attract? Who sort of stand for the same things and believe in the same things, right? And I don't think that everybody has to be a community builder like I am, but I would
Mm,
say go and find those people, right? And and again, I think a lot of the same things that we've talked about in the past, which is share your story, make their story your story, like, like find common points of connections, like go out and buy them coffee, like, learn about their work, learn about their why, see how you can be helpful with intros you know, or, you know, connecting them to opportunities or like maybe collaborating together on different
mm,
passion projects. And I think just good things will happen, right? So a lot of the communities that I have been working on for 10 years just didn't happen out of the blue. A lot of that happened up around a coffee chat with somebody who shared the same things that passionate about the same things that I was passionate about, had the same ideas that I had. Product Leader Summit was a coffee chat with Gib Biddle,
mm.
who many of you might know is former VP of product at Netflix and
Netflix.
CPO at Chegg. And he's done a lot of product speaking and coaching and writing. But he and I grabbed coffee at Phil's and we just talked about, well, first of all, we got to know each other, but then we just talked about how, as VPs of product, it's lonely at the top. There's not a lot of folks that we can learn from, not certainly within our own companies,
Mm,
but that we wanted to connect with others who were in similar roles, who we could learn from and trade ideas with. And since the community didn't exist, maybe we should be the ones to build the community, right? And
yeah.
so Product Leader Summit was born in 2017, and 8-9 years later, it's going really strong with our next gathering of VPs of product this September in the Bay Area. But I would say that that's, I could sort of, share a very similar story across all of the communities that I've been involved with. And it's always started with a one-on-one connection, sitting down with somebody who, shared similar interests and values, and then us
Yeah.
saying we should work together on something that we're so passionate about, and let's just see what good things happen. So none of the communities I've ever done by myself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's so much power in being able to bring people together. And this episode happened because you were like gracious enough to have that one-on-one chat with me. And it's so good to like see the outcome of that. And I can't wait to get this live so that folks can listen to it. So definitely out there, for somebody who's listening to this, it's just one coffee chat conversation. It's just like one message that you send to somebody that you'd really like to connect with. And I think that's a great first step, right? And instead of thinking about it as like building a huge community, I think the first step you could do is just send one message to somebody that you would really want to chat with and you've been like meaning to chat with. And I guess the magic happens there.
Yeah, you got it right.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. I think I've just like thanked you so many times, but yeah, like this is fantastic. We had like such a great conversation, a lot of concepts and topics close to my heart, and a lot of resonance that I could see from your stories and the examples and anecdotes that you brought in. It's lovely to see the shared stories from another person being shared and something that you can like really align with. So yes, thank you so much for being here.
So much fun, Ashara. And for those of you who want to connect with me, just feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or send me a DM. Get involved in some of the communities I'm part of, but I would love to meet as many of you as possible. So thank you for having me, and it was a fun chat.
Yes, awesome. And yes, her definitely responds to DM. So please do drop a DM to her if you'd like to like know something from her. So yes, see you.